Hi, this is Paisley Shreese,
This is Dr. Crow.
and welcome to episode 7 of us playing Civ 6 as the Ottomans. That was fine, right?
Yeah.
So it's been a while since our last episode because I had to cram a little bit for my final exams, which are done. Whew. I am one step closer to being a PhD candidate. I'm still not. I have to next semester. I'll be a candidate, which means I can
ABD.
yeah, all but dissertation, which is the last thing I got to do, and that usually takes like
3 years.
3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Civ.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the last episode, I'm trying to remember what we did. Well, first of all, none of this is happening, so let me just go ahead and hide my pins.
Okay.
We upgraded some men-at-arms into janissaries, and we got this Hungarian city, and we are about to see the Byzantines probably take this city, maybe not. We'll see if we can get there in time. And we're just going to be upgrading units. I think the goals for this episode are to finish guilds so we can get this commercial hub bonus card, and to start building our grand bazaars, which will be fun.
Very nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to start there. So what about the historical conversation, Eric? Where did we last leave off there?
Well, I think we were just finishing up with our description of the Janissaries and also talking a little bit about the era post-Suleiman.
Right.
I think now we'd like to maybe head into the 1600s, later 1600s, and talk a little bit about the later periods because...
That was a mistake.
Oh, you're okay?
I didn't mean to do that. I think it should be fine.
He's fine, yeah. You can upgrade anyway.
Yep. Sorry, go. What did I do? Okay, anyways. Keep going.
And yeah, maybe get a little bit into the 1600s, which on Wikipedia is called the stagnation of the Ottoman Empire.
Is it really?
Very unfortunately.
That's sad.
Because in our field, again, we don't really think about it in terms of stagnation. In fact, it's a very dynamic period in which there was a lot of contestation and intellectual activity about how the Ottomans should deal with the pressures of early modernity.
Exactly. Interesting. Stagnation. So what is that referring to? Like what time period specifically?
So I think that's usually referring to the period from basically post-Suleiman to what is called the New Order, the Nizam al-Jadid, which starts around the 1790s. So this is obviously a very long period, and there's actually
1790s. Huh?
there's a huge amount of cultural, political, economic change that happens during this period. So again, we don't really think of it in those terms, although you will find it pretty common still in popular history, on YouTube, whatever. But
yeah, I mean, one of the other terms that sort of was popular for a while and is maybe becoming less popular was Tulip Era, right?
yeah, Tulip Era refers to the reign of Ahmed III, which is from 1703 to 1730. And it is a little bit interesting because it's actually a kind of popular history term that became an academic history term. It was produced by this writer in the 1910s, Ahmed Refik, and he wanted to kind of understand or propose a time period when the Ottomans were in their own era of enlightenment. Because during that time, of course, you have the European Enlightenment going on. Soon after, you have the Greek Enlightenment going on. So he wants to think about, well, what is the Muslim Turkish Enlightenment? So he proposes that the Tulip Era, the reign of Ahmed III, is that kind of enlightenment, and he says that his idea is that it was basically sort of set to take off when reactionary forces like the Janissaries put a stop to it.
So why is this popular history? Is this not a historian? Is Ahmed Refik not a historian?
He is a historian, but this was a sort of history book that was serialized in a newspaper.
Cool.
Where it's like he would give like little history updates and stuff. And there was, kind of like fun facts about history, right? And that's where it came out of.
Kind of like this.
Yeah.
Let's coin a term, Eric.
The commercial district era. So the Tulip Era is kind of one of the main interest points during this supposed stagnation period, because for a long time it was seen as basically as Ahmet Rafiq imagined it, right? As a kind of period in which there was this liberalization, science, this flourishing of culture, which was sort of put to an end by the Janissaries, and it would not be until the New Order, 1790s, that kind of progress in the Ottoman Empire would start up again.
Right.
And this isn't really the way that we think about it again. Tulip Era is still used as a term. The term itself comes from the Ottoman kind of fascination with tulips, which kind of was like a stock market bubble, I guess.
It's so funny you're saying that, because Potato McWhiskey was literally talking about tulips in one of his streams. And they were like, oh, the tulips should be something for the Dutch, right? And I was like, no, it's for the Ottomans. The Ottomans deserve the tulip. Because it's very much a symbol that not only the Ottoman sultans were sort of engaging with, but it's lasted up until today. The symbol for Istanbul, like the municipal symbol, is a mosque in the shape of a tulip. Yeah,
and the symbol for Turkish Airlines is a tulip, right? It was, I
don't see the Dutch using tulip like that.
So it was kind of a, symbol of it being a little bit of a kind of, decadent kind of age in which, people would spend enormous sums on these very, very exquisite tulips. And of course, they did have tulips, but maybe it's a little bit overstated, a little bit romanticized.
You think so?
Yeah. But it was.
There's also these amazing paintings of tulips, like botanical drawings almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the Tulip Era is also referencing this sort of period of decadence and pleasure, right? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's important, I think, first to step back and look a little bit at what was preceding the Tulip Era.
Right.
So the late 1600s, the mid 1600s to the late 1600s is a period of a lot of contestation about what society should look like in the Ottoman Empire, in Istanbul particularly, but not just in Istanbul. We have a huge amount of changes that are happening, including, coffee culture, tobacco from the New World. All these things are kind of producing new social forms. And we have, in a very broad scale, a movement from a kind of more feudal economy to one that's really based on cash, right? The kind of cash-based economy we have today. And this is because of all the silver and gold flooding in from the New World and the trade between China and, Europe. But what this caused was a kind of new merchant class that made its money off coffee, made its money off tobacco, was, dealing cash now, and had a sort of ethos which was very much kind of akin to the Puritan movement in England during this time, right? And for this movement, which is called the Kadizadalis, they had a very strong reaction against what they saw as the decadent culture of that time, the late 1600s. And so we have a whole, many decades of cultural war, basically, between the Kadizadalis, who are all about, kind of getting rid of the Sufi influence in Ottoman culture, having it very, by the book, very orthodox, very much focused on the life and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and trying to get rid of all these additions, right? They also really criticized the corruption of that time. There was a practice called cash waqfs. We talked a little bit about waqfs before. And cash
You're
walks,
right, which are the endowments.
endowments, yeah. They're
Religious endowments.
They're non-taxable. They're kind of supposed to be for charitable purposes. But during this time, people start turning their capital assets, like cash, into waqfs and just using it as basically like investment funds, right? Non-taxable.
Non-fungible.
Non-fungible. So, they really criticize this. Like, this is totally against what the whole purpose of the waqf was supposed to be, right? So, there's this huge, contestation, and there's many, like, street battles, and people are being stoned, and, like, the only time in Ottoman history where we have a record of people being, like, stoned and burned alive and stuff happens during this period, right? So it's a very...
Oh, are you sure that's the only one?
In terms of like this kind of like mob mentality, yeah, like maybe not in the
19th century.
19th century, but yeah.
I was just thinking about the sort of the story of the mob in Syria, right? That's a popular one too.
Yeah, for sure. But this is like very well known as kind of like this sort of sectarian religious kind of conflict happening,
Right.
and we have sort of the defenders of the customary order, like the great Ottoman philosopher, encyclopedist Katip Çelebi, who are just like mocking the Kadizadeli, saying these guys are ignorant, they're bums, right? They're like, they're fanatical, right? And then the Kadizadelis are criticizing the Sufis and attacking them in the streets and all this stuff. So it's a very tense period.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, the Sultanate basically says, okay, I'm not dealing with this. I'm getting out of Istanbul. Like, this is just... So the Sultanate gradually moves back to Edirne, basically, where they can kind of be a little bit more secluded from all this urban strife.
So responsible.
Yeah. And they kind of leave the running of the state to the Grand Viziers, who by this time come from a single family called the Kurpulus. Yeah. Sorry, we know someone who says it in a Texas accent, which is very funny.
It's a different Corpulus.
Yeah, it's a different one. It's the same.
Maybe we shouldn't put this in public.
Same family, but yeah, later, 20th century.
They're the same Corpulus?
Yeah, it's the same
Oh, no. Okay. I should have known that. Why didn't I? I just assumed they weren't the same.
Yeah, you would have thought he would name himself.
Because we're talking about 1600s family, and this man who's from the 20th centry.
Yeah, historian.
That's a long time.
Long time, but I mean that generational wealth.
How do we know he's not lying?
No, he's pretty sure.
Yeah. There's like a lot of Sayyids, which means you're like the descendant of the Prophet in like the Muslim world, but like it's also a known thing that a lot of people just like make that up.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a bit longer of a chain. I don't know what to do here. I'm gonna declare war. You know what?
You think right now? You sure?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
okay,
good. It's fine.
All right.
It's a long time coming. They took all the cities I wanted to take.
Is this guy gonna be okay though?
Well, these are Polish.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hello.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. I think we'll be okay for Era score. I don't know. Hopefully it'll be okay. What do I do here? I don't know why I did that without really thinking about it, but I'm going to think about it right now.
Okay.
I also need another general soon. Oh, yeah. Keep going.
So...
Kurpula.
Yeah, so the Tulip Era, is... rhetorically meant to, come after this and show this period of artistic excellence and this period of opening up to the world and opening up to the Enlightenment, right? As a contrast to that earlier period, right, of fanaticism and violence. And again, these are really kind of narrative constructions, right? I mean, there are significant differences between these periods, particularly after what is called the Adirna Incident, which is when the chief religious official, the Sheikh al-Islam, his name is Feyzullah Effendi, starts to kind of accrue a lot of positions in a lot of different offices and a lot of kind of siphoning off a lot of money. People get very mad at this because he's supposed to be just like an employee. Like, he's not, Shaykh al-Islam is not like it's not meant to be like a commanding role, right? And except in terms of like theology and law. So basically the Janissaries force the Sultan to come back to Istanbul in 1703, and they force him to execute Feyzullah Efendi very publicly. And this really substantiates the power of the Janissaries. Right. And
what an interesting way to begin a Tulip Era of decadence.
Yeah. And, part of the issue is that on one hand, we do have a lot of interesting things happening during the reign of Ahmed III. During this time, we have the first Ottoman Turkish printing press, which is, printing all kinds of philosophical texts, translations, geographical texts, scientific texts, right? We do have a flourishing in poetry. So probably the person who's considered the greatest Ottoman poet, Nedim, works during this time. And he's bringing in, for the first time in a long time, he's bringing in vernacular language, spoken language. He's bringing in songs, right, into this very rarefied Divan poetry tradition. We have flourishing architecture, fountains, which you know a lot about.
Yeah, I work on fountains. People call me the fountain lady. It's fine.
Do you want to tell us about the fountains?
Yeah, so there's this wonderful book by Shirine Hamadeh. It's about the burgeoning of a fountain culture that's related to this growth in a middle class that's patroning architecture in general, but these fountains become this really great opportunity for these people who aren't, massively wealthy, but have some power and money that can patron a neighborhood fountain. And they're done in these really elaborate, beautiful styles. We talked a little bit about the Baroque style. So that's sort of part of our argument is that the Baroque style sort of takes off with this introduction of experimentation brought not by the sultans but by other classes, and then the sultans are adopting and adapting to this trend, right? So they're not the trendsetters, but they're picking up those architectural trends. So yeah, there's some beautiful fountains, a lot of them by women, a lot of them by military generals. And on top of this opening up of patronage, she also talks about the opening up of public space. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? We'll decide what to do here. Try to focus.
So we have what happens is Istanbul is along this kind of strait called the Bosphorus, which separates Europe and Asia. And for most of the Byzantine period, mostly early Ottoman period, the city is very much concentrated within the ancient Roman walls. And what happens in, the 1700s is that the city really begins to expand past those walls, expand along the water, and really open up. And this is accompanied by this vast outgrowth of gardens and parks, which really establish a kind of leisure culture, or culture of kind of the spectacle of leisure, which is represented in art and poetry and, also in the politics of that time. This is also a time period when we have the beginnings of what would be called the Greek Enlightenment. There's a kind of community of Greek speakers called Phanariates who live in the Phanar region of Istanbul. And they form a really important bureaucratic class that also starts to govern parts of the Ottoman Empire as a kind of semi-independent rulers, and they're patroning a lot of writing in Greek and Greek philosophy. We have Armenians who are really flourishing in terms of culture at this time as well.
And and sort of the start of this family of architects called the Balyan family, who are Armenian. Well, I guess they also keep going until a little bit later.
They're most famous in the 19th century, but they started in the 18th century.
Right.
We have connections between Jewish communities and Christian communities and Muslim communities, particularly in terms of music. So it's a really interesting period, so we can understand how people came to the idea of the Tulip Era as this kind of Enlightenment period. At the same time, people maybe took it a little bit too far by saying it's like directly analogous to the European Enlightenment. So one of Shirine Hamadeh's arguments is that, a lot of this like garden culture and palace construction, was not meant to be in competition with like Versailles and, Europe was actually meant to be in competition with the Ottomans' traditional, engagements like Iran and the Mughals.
Right, and she uses Shir-Nadim, the poet's own sort of panegyrics for some of these buildings. And for example, Sadabad is one that he talks about, and I think it was him, or perhaps it was another poet, but they compare it to Isfahan, not Versailles. So we have a lot of European travelers comparing the like promenades and the parks that are opening up to Parisian ones. But if we look at the Ottomans themselves, they don't call it Baroque. They don't compare it to France. They compare it to, tropes. So like one of the arguments against this argument is that, well, actually, they're not literally comparing it to Isfahan, but it's become this trope to compare your architecture to Isfahan or Ctesiphon. Is that how you say it? Ctesiphon?
I don't know how you say it.
I'll show a picture.
Yeah.
I don't know the pronunciation.
Yeah. So, there's that argument. And there's also, if you actually look at many of the venues that are supposed to be these like very cosmopolitan, spaces of mixing, like the coffee houses, like baths, you realize actually like, even though there was this kind of mutual flourishing of cultures, there was also, very tight regulation and segregation during this time, right? It wasn't a time of like free mixing between peoples, right? In terms of gender relations, there was actually a more stringent application of rules about.
Well,
maybe.
Okay. This is a debate because
it's a debate. I lean on the side of yours.
Well, because, okay, here's the issue. It's hard to know exactly what's happening in this time period. The documents that we have were going off of, one of them is the increasing sort of sumptuary rules that sort of restrict women's access to places, that are saying you can only dress this way, and they're banning certain clothing for women and for minorities. I don't exactly remember what you could or couldn't wear, but
things like imported things like silks or Indian cloths had a lot of.
Yeah, but also if you were Jewish, you couldn't wear certain colors.
Yeah,
you
if
couldn't
you're
wear
Christian,
green.
you couldn't wear certain colors. Yeah.
So they're like those things kind of increase. The rules about them increase. Now here's the question: are they increasing because people are sort of doing those things? Is it a reactionary move? And so what do we look at? Do we look at the rules forbidding them and saying, well, these were forbidden? Or do we think because it's becoming such like an important part of the legal system, it means that there's something else happening, that's people are not following these rules, or that they feel like something is happening in the culture that necessitates these rules?
Yeah, and the counter argument is that what very well could have happened is that sort of like what we see right now in the US, which is that there's these huge crackdowns on
critical
race theory, as if kindergartners are being taught like Foucault and stuff, right? When they're clearly not. It's never not happening anywhere. But it's this kind of preemptive moral panic, right? And some people lean on the side of that for the Tulip Era. Some people lean on the side that there was this kind of boundary pushing that prompted a reaction.
Oh God.
Whoa.
That's not good. That's not good at all. I literally just built this.
What happened?
Oh, they just built a unit that came after me. It's a strong unit too. Should be fine.
This is major victory.
Yeah, it's fine. There's just so much damage on my thing that I just built. Actually, let's go across the water there. Yeah, so like, okay, I think, yeah, thinking about critical race theory is an interesting parallel, right? So there's this reaction to something. It may not be what people who are reacting say it is, but I think it does represent changes that they fear, right? It's not that there's absolutely nothing different between now and 20 years ago, right? There is something different, but it's hard to say what it is just from the reactions.
Exactly. And, you know, one of the main ways in which we, you know, think about the Tulip Era comes from its end, right? Because just like in 1703, the Janissaries revolt and, you know, depose the Sultan and kill Feyzullah Efendi and, you know, force the court to come back. In 1730, the Janissaries again revolt and they force the deposition of Ahmed III, force the execution of many of these leaders of the, you know, kind of Tulip Era aesthetic. The poet Nadim is kind of chased from rooftop to rooftop.
This is the saddest story.
Yeah, he is running from this mob, and he's on the roof, and he's running from rooftop to rooftop, and then he slips and falls and dies. And that street now is called Shire Nadim Street.
Yeah. We used to live on that street, so that's why it makes me sad to think about.
And, you know, the revolt is led by this bathhouse attendant. So he's kind of like this guy who scrubs you, basically. is in the bath. That's his job, right? He scrubs you. And if you've ever been to a Turkish bath, it's a very violent scrubbing. So you can understand why a janissary might be involved in that. And he is named Patrona Halil, and he basically rules Istanbul as like a dictator for like a couple of months. And he's just doing crazy stuff, you know. And it's very funny because there's all these European painters who live in Istanbul, and they're the most famous one is Van Moor. I can show a painting of his. Very like well-known painter who paints these extraordinary scenes of Istanbul, but he's there during the Patrona Halil revolt, and Patrona Halil is like, okay, you gotta paint me. So he has this painting of him, which I'll show, you know, we can show, which is him holding a sword, and there's people getting like stabbed in the background. It's just, but so, you know, for Ahmed Rafiq, for many people, for most of the 20th century, this was seen as like the absolute disaster, right? This was the Janissaries put an end to this Renaissance, this Enlightenment, and, you know, they just brought about this kind of stagnation once again.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that, you know, I'm an architectural historian, but I'm an art history department. And one of the things that I find pretty interesting is that Patrona Halil is painted as this figure in historiography is said to be this figure who's like anti-European influence, he's kind of like a reactionary, right?
Yeah.
And then the painting he himself patrons of himself is in a European style. So I think
it's by a European, yeah.
It's by a European and in a European style. So I think the story is a little bit more complicated than of this narrative that's painted that, you know, it was a time where the Ottomans were so close to becoming Europeanized, but thanks to this bath attendant, it all went south, right? And I don't think it's that simple.
No, definitely not. And, you know, if you look at the 1703 revolt, our friend and colleague Baki Tezcan has a book where he talks about the 1703 revolt. And
it's a great book.
It's very nice, yeah. And it's interesting that he quotes a janissary who says, you know, they just overthrown the Sultan and they're talking amongst themselves. And he's like, you know, why don't we just establish a republic, right? Which is like, you know, that's, you know, quite an amazing thing, right? for someone who's supposed to be totally reactionary, conservative, right, is that they're thinking about, the military kind of republics of England, right, during that time, right, because that's the English Civil War had just happened. They're thinking about the kind of military rulers and kind of republics of Algiers and, that kind of stuff, and thinking, why don't we just establish a republic, right? So, that's why it's
important to not think about what happened as a historian and sort of think about that's the progression that was set right away, but there was these moments that things could have gone very differently.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to get Armand on my side because I was looking here and it's really hard to access Poland.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll just go after the Byzantines, but it looks like it's just one way through. There's just one way through. So maybe we'll just go after Poland next.
Okay.
I forget about the Byzantines for now, and then maybe we can go around.
That could work.
So yeah, I need to get them on my side. I'm at 3, 4, 5, 6. I need one more. Okay. Yes. So keep going. I forgot what we were talking about.
So one of the things economically that happens in the 18th century, it starts earlier, but it really becomes very prominent in the 18th century, is that the kind of need for cash for the government becomes really crucial. And in order to kind of raise more kind of injections of cash, the Ottomans start the system called tax farming. And this is basically, there's a kind of set amount that the government says, okay, this is what this city, this province should pay in tax per year. And we get a volcano?
My horse just died, my horseman. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here by just trying to force take this city with only 3 janissaries.
I mean, it's going pretty well.
That's not, well, never mind. Great. Okay,
Yeah,
nice. Unexpected. I'll take it.
Yeah, so they start doing a system called tax farming, which is they'll basically
farming right now.
Yeah, get those taxes. They'll start auctioning off the tax collection rights. So basically, someone will pay a lump sum, and they will pay that for the right to collect taxes. And the government will set an amount for what this city should pay, for taxes. And if you collect less than that, you eat the cost. But if you collect more than that, if you get a surplus, you keep all the surplus.
Feels like such a scam, but people, I guess, got rich off of it.
Well, the idea was that, the government here, the previous Ottoman taxation system had really been about collecting taxes in kind, pay us this many sheep, this many wheat, whatever, right? But now they need cash because the military system is now more about mercenaries and more about, paying soldiers in cash rather than this kind of feudal system. And, just for their own purposes, cash is a lot more important. So this is a way of getting them to have kind of injections of money. And the idea is that, if it's 4, 5 years, 10 years, then if you give out this concession to a person, they'll have an incentive to invest in that area so that they'll get more surplus, right? This obviously did not happen. It happens sometimes like that, but for the most part, what happened was someone would get their tax form for 5 years and then just crush the peasantry and extort every single penny they could get or every single akçe they could get out of it. And then they would just dump this totally broken province or city back on the government or onto some other sucker who would pay for that tax form, right?
Sounds like NFTs.
Well, it sounds like neoliberalism, which is why a lot of people didn't understand this system. They're like, why the hell would the Ottomans do this, right? This is clearly a sign of decline. And then neoliberalism happened in the U.S. and they're like, oh, this is why government would do this, right?
I'm going to make peace with Buddha. I got their capital. It's
Yeah.
good enough for me.
Can you get anything else out of them?
Money. 16 gold.
All right,
That's not a lot considering.
Generous offer.
And then just making sure I get their borders as soon as possible. And then they want so much more for just borders.
Yeah.
I'll give you some horses. There we go. Great.
Nice.
Yeah. And then, okay, so here's my plan now. I'm going to make my way to Persia.
Wow.
I probably need more than 3
Couple of guys,
broken
yeah.
janissaries.
You might need that trebuchet too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm building the Terracotta Army, which will give me a promotion on all my units.
Nice.
Which means I can move my units now, promote them by the border.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this one already has a promotion. And where is my great general? Like, please, one more
Almost
turn.
there.
One more turn. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to explain what I'm doing here.
Yeah, nice.
And yeah, so which means I can move this guy even though he's injured. And I'll just have to move through this way because there's kind of a road. Maybe it's better that way. Oh, and here we just got this city of Gdansk.
Yeah.
Gdansk. And I'm going to move Ibrahim Pasha there
Okay.
to help with loyalty because I think
Nice.
I'm like fine here.
Seems pretty good. Yeah.
No problem. Looks like the Hungarians were easy peasy. Great. And then, yeah, I'm dealing with barbarians here. And, oh, I should turn off banking because I'm almost done with the guild's tech. And then this one gives me visibility, which is
Nice.
important. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the plan going forward.
All right. Should we pause the video here?
Yeah, is there anything else you want to say about what we were talking about? I feel like I interrupted you a little bit.
No, it's okay. Well, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about how they adapted to the tax farm system next episode.
Yes, that could be fun.
No, you don't want to hear that?
Yeah, I'm sure people want to hear about that. That's fine.
It is important. It's very important.
Yes.
Tax farms.
And I'll throw in some architecture, beautiful pictures along the way.
Yeah.
Great. So that's it for now. Like losing my train of thought. But I think we're probably gonna record one more video.
Yeah, sounds good.
So see you in like a few minutes.
Yeah.
Bye.